What do you feel your parents were expecting you to become?
Like all parents, they want their children to be happy.
Are you happy?
I am happy in the sense that I have many things to be grateful for, but if I have a wish for myself, it's to be able to achieve something.
Sometimes a story doesn't explode right away. Sometimes it just sits there, buried under sealed folders, missing recordings, erased names, and people who are very invested in making sure the dots are never connected. Years pass, faces change, narratives are rewritten, and the public is left believing the version that feels clean enough to accept. But every once in a while, someone who is standing right in the middle of it all decides to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to crack the surface. And according to multiple legal insiders, that's exactly what happened here. For months now, quiet whispers have been moving through legal and journalistic circles, the kind that never make headlines but never go away either. Whispers that during sealed testimony in portions the public was never meant to hear, Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly spoke about a woman no one expected to be connected to the Epstein record in any way. Not a politician, not a financier, not a known socialite, but Meghan Markle. And according to those same sources, this wasn't a passing mention, it wasn't a rumor repeated secondhand. It was a name placed inside a much larger narrative, one that allegedly reframes how Meghan moved through elite spaces long before the world ever saw her walking into royal life. This is not the polished fairy tale version people recognize. This is a version that was allegedly buried inside testimony the public never got access to. When the Epstein files were released, people expected clarity. They expected names, timelines, accountability. Instead, they got documents riddled with black bars, missing audio, and statements assuring everyone that nothing important had been removed. But according to individuals familiar with the process, that assurance wasn't true. Insiders claim that more than 12 full hours of Maxwell's testimony were removed from public release, not trimmed, not summarized, completely pulled. 12 hours where names, places, descriptions, and interactions were allegedly discussed in detail, then quietly erased. And buried somewhere inside those missing hours, according to multiple accounts, is where Meghan Markle's name allegedly appears. Maxwell herself reportedly hinted that the most significant portions of her testimony were never meant to be heard, not because they were irrelevant, but because of who they implicated and how far those implications stretched. Sources say the redacted sections allegedly included descriptions of young women who moved through elite environments connected to Epstein and Maxwell, how they were introduced, who introduced them, what those women were expected to provide socially, emotionally, and visually inside rooms the public never sees. And according to those claims, one name stunned even seasoned investigators: Meghan. The reaction inside those rooms, according to insiders, wasn't outrage, it was disbelief. The same question keeps coming up again and again. How did her name end up there? To understand that, sources say you have to look at what Maxwell allegedly said next. In the redacted portions, Maxwell reportedly described a young woman known by a quiet nickname. Not flashy, not obvious, a name meant to sound harmless: Flower. According to these accounts, the nickname was allegedly used for someone who appeared soft, charming, non-threatening, someone who blended easily, someone who moved through elite gatherings without drawing attention to herself. And according to what Maxwell is alleged to have said, that woman was Meghan. Not as a bystander, not as an outsider, but as someone who allegedly worked within adult entertainment adjacent environments tied to elite social gatherings. Not explicit, not public. Carefully curated spaces where powerful men were entertained, flattered, and guided through private social ecosystems. Those who claim knowledge of the testimony say it wasn't presented as a shocking confession. It wasn't dramatic. It was described as casual, almost matter of fact. She worked. They called her Flower. If that allegation is true, it places Meghan not on the fringe of Epstein's world, but inside the same pipeline that introduced young women to powerful men years before she ever met Prince Harry. And that's where the story stops being uncomfortable and starts becoming deeply unsettling. Because Maxwell, according to insiders, wasn't the only person who allegedly linked Meghan to that world. Another name enters here. A woman whose testimony nearly forced everything into the open. Before Prince Andrew quietly settled his lawsuit, Virginia Giuffre reportedly had a list of individuals she wanted questioned. Survivors. witnesses, people who are allegedly present during key periods. And according to legal sources, Meghan Markle was on that list. The claim is that Virginia believed Meghan had knowledge of Andrew's private interactions, not through gossip, not through media, but through firsthand exposure during a time when Andrew, Epstein, and Maxwell were moving closely together. Insiders say this request caused absolute panic behind closed doors, because calling Meghan to testify would not have been symbolic. It would have placed the future Duchess of Sussex under oath. It would have required her to answer questions about where she had been, who she had met, and how she had entered those circles in the first place. And here's the part sources say truly terrified everyone involved. If Meghan had been questioned, it wouldn't have only exposed what she knew about Andrew. It would have exposed how she herself ended up inside those environments at all. Shortly after that request, Andrew settled. No trial, no witness list, no testimony. People who followed the case closely say the timing felt anything but coincidental. Because if Meghan really did have knowledge, even passively, even socially, then the risk of putting her on the stand was simply too high. Andrew walked away from the case, Meghan walked deeper into royal life. But stories like this don't disappear, they wait. And the trail left behind by the sealed testimony, the flower allegation, and the unexplored witness list leads directly into the next phase of this saga. Because according to insiders, Meghan's connection to elite power didn't begin with Harry. It began long before, quietly, in rooms the public never saw. And it traces back to a single year when Jeffrey Epstein wasn't yet treated as a global warning sign, but as a welcome guest. That year was 2000. That year, 2000, keeps resurfacing in every version of this story told by people who were watching quietly from the edges. Back then, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't a name people recoiled from. He wasn't avoided, he wasn't whispered about, he was welcomed, invited, seated where only trusted guests were allowed to sit. According to insiders familiar with royal social calendars from that period, Epstein was personally invited into one of the most controlled and prestigious environments connected to the monarchy, the Royal Box at Ascot. This wasn't a casual invitation. This wasn't someone tagging along. This was access granted at the highest level. Ghislaine Maxwell was there, Sarah Ferguson was there, Prince Andrew was there, and the way people describe it now, Epstein didn't appear like an outsider trying to impress royalty. He appeared like someone already known, already vetted, already comfortable. That detail alone makes people uneasy when they look back. Because during that same era, Andrew and Epstein were seen together repeatedly, traveling, dining, attending private gatherings far from cameras and press. And wherever Andrew appeared, sources say Fergie was never far behind. Those who watch the social dynamics closely paint a very specific picture of her role, not passive, not oblivious, but deeply aware of how introductions worked, how invitations were managed, and how proximity could change someone's future overnight. Insiders describe her as a gatekeeper, someone who knew exactly who should be allowed near whom and who should absolutely not. And according to claims tied to the sealed testimony, everything in this story seems to circle back to her. That's why later, when reports surfaced suggesting Fergie knew Meghan Markle long before Meghan ever met Harry, and Fergie publicly denied it, people who knew those circles didn't just question it. They raised eyebrows. Because if Meghan had ever moved through social paths that even brushed against Maxwell, Epstein, or Andrew, Fergie would have seen her first. And this is where the public narrative begins to bend. Because according to multiple insider accounts, Meghan wasn't a complete stranger drifting innocently toward royalty. She was already hovering at the edges, already familiar. Already someone Fergie allegedly recognized the moment she appeared within proximity of royal life. Sources claim Fergie knew exactly who Meghan was, exactly where she had circulated, and exactly why she did not want her anywhere near Prince Andrew. One insider described it bluntly, without hesitation. She blocked her, not physically, socially, meaning invitations were redirected, proximities adjusted, paths altered just enough to prevent Meghan from being too close to Andrew, not because of jealousy, but because of risk. If the allegations tied to Maxwell's testimony were even part partially true, then Fergie would have recognized the danger immediately. Not just to Andrew, but to the monarchy itself. But here's where the story twists in a way that unsettles people the most. While Fergie allegedly kept Meghan away from Andrew, she did not remove her from the royal orbit altogether. Meghan continued to move through London's elite hospitality spaces, private members clubs, charity-linked events, invitation-only gatherings where wealthy benefactors, donors, and power players crossed paths quietly. That raises a question insiders still can't answer comfortably. If Fergie truly knew Meghan before Harry, how far back does Meghan's royal-adjacent story actually go? Because if the timeline stretches earlier than the public version suggests, then Meghan's entry into the royal family didn't begin in 2016. It began years before, quietly, strategically, inside the same elite social ecosystems that once welcomed Epstein and Maxwell without hesitation. And that leads directly to the weekend people now point to as the moment everything changed. Not the blind date story, not the Instagram myth, not the carefully polished fairy tale, but a weekend in April 2015. Prince Harry traveled to Istanbul for the grand opening of a new Soho House location, a private club known among insiders as a place where influence is exchanged as easily as conversation. This wasn't a Hollywood party, this wasn't random. Attendance was curated, names were chosen carefully, invitations were extended with purpose. Harry was there, Prince Charles was there, and according to members familiar with the event, Meghan was there too. In that world, nothing is accidental. You don't just wander into a Soho House opening at that level, you're placed there, introduced, positioned. Sources say Meghan had already been connected to Soho House through a web of stylists, influencers, and social connectors who moved effortlessly between London, Toronto, Los Angeles, and New York. Soho House wasn't just a club, it was a machine, a network, a gateway. And for Meghan, insiders say that Istanbul weekend changed everything. After that trip, people noticed a shift. Her public image sharpened. Her access expanded. Her presence in humanitarian spaces increased. Doors that had been closed suddenly opened without resistance. Months later, she was positioned perfectly to meet Harry. Those who watched her rise closely describe it as too fast, too seamless, too perfectly timed. One insider summed it up in a sentence that still lingers. She didn't meet Harry, she arrived at Harry. But that Istanbul chapter opens an even darker question. Who arranged it? And why did Meghan appear at an event filled with people deeply connected to the same elite networks Maxwell allegedly described in her sealed testimony? Because after Istanbul, things didn't slow down. They accelerated. And that acceleration leads directly into the political world, American power circles, and the people who allegedly opened doors for Meghan long before Harry ever stepped into the room. She didn't surface next in Hollywood. According to insiders, she surfaced in New York's private rooms around 2013, places tied to media, politics, philanthropy. Introduced, not invited, known, not noticed. Then came speeches, foundations, sudden credibility. People watching weren't shocked by her rise, only by how protected it felt. Because when names are redacted, silence isn't innocence, it's insurance. And until those missing hours are heard, this story doesn't end.